He was known as Dr. Death, but he said he was committed to helping people die with dignity. Dr. Jack Kevorkian, who died in early June himself, was regarded as a hero to some, a heretic to others. But he made us think about a tough topic, dying. If you knew that you were dying, or you were in pain, or you were just tired of dealing with an illness and someone could help you die with dignity, would you choose that? Well, that's just one of the questions that we're posing today here on It's Your Call. If you'd like to tell me what you think or your personal experience, you can email me right now at lynn@lynndoyle.net. Joining us now on the telephone is, once again, attorney Rita Marker, who is the executive director of the Patients' Rights Council. Rita, thank you so much for being with us.
You're very welcome.
I invited you to be on this program because I know in the past you had the opportunity to debate Dr. Kevorkian and his attorney on several occasions. How committed are you now to making sure that a law like the one that was passed in Oregon never makes it to see the light elsewhere in this country?
Well, actually, the law like that in Oregon has become law in another state, as a matter of fact, in the state of Washington. And there are attempts to do so in many other states. The whole objection to such a law, I think, rests on several different bases. One is, if we look realistically at where we are today, and we're talking about healthcare cost containment. Now, in Oregon and in Washington, the crime of assisted suicide has been transformed into a medical treatment, doctor-prescribed suicide. That has a result that actually puts it on the same level as any other medical treatment, with a couple of exceptions. One is that it is the least expensive medical treatment, and that's the most important point. So we have a situation where we're not talking here about, of course, patient's choice primarily, but we're talking here about giving too much power to profit-driven insurance companies and government bureaucrats, quite frankly.
Are you saying that on some occasions, health insurance companies might actually pay for assisted suicide, but not for the medicines to help prolong a life?
They actually have done so. In fact, in the state of Oregon, a couple of years ago, a woman by the name of Barbara Wagner, a retired school bus driver, who had had cancer in the past and gone through chemo and had been cancer-free for over 5 years, so she was considered cured. She went back to her doctor for her annual checkup. She got bad news that the cancer had returned.
Okay.
But then she got good news that there was a type of treatment available for the type of cancer she had then been diagnosed as having that would not have the side effects of the other chemo, that would likely extend her life and make her more comfortable. Well, she got the prescription, and she was covered by health insurance, the Oregon Health Plan, which is Oregon's Medicaid program. And 2 days after she got the prescription, she received a letter from the Oregon Health Plan telling her that they would not pay for the prescription that her doctor had written, but would pay for assisted suicide. In fact, she was not the only person who had received such a letter.
And how outraged were you at that experience?
I think outrage isn't the word. I think the outrage is just immensely saddened by the tragedy of it, and also very much aware of the reality of it.
Okay.
Because this becomes a measure of cost containment. We talk about patient choice, but when doctor-prescribed suicide becomes the only choice that the insurance company will pay for, that's not patient choice.
Right.
That actually is taking away the patient's choice.
Okay, I want to get some response here in the studio, Rita, to that because John Oberdiek is supporting assisted suicide here on this program, so I'd like to give you an opportunity to tell us what you think about what Rita's just said.
Sure. So I don't think anybody would disagree that that is tragic, sad, and outrageous. I'm not going to defend healthcare industries and insurance companies and so forth. But that's also a separate issue. There's a matter of principle here, a matter of moral principle and a matter of legal principle.
But it's a legitimate concern.
It is a legitimate concern, absolutely. If it were to be recognized as a right, it has to be implemented in a way that is extraordinarily conscientious and well regulated. And if that can't be done, then it has to be that you have to figure out how to do it in such a way. But none of that counts against recognizing there being a right.
Rita, what do you say to people who argue that it is an individual's right to make that choice themselves?
Well, we're not really dealing here, though, about an individual's choice. We're dealing here with whether or not doctors can prescribe suicide. And when you're talking about it and saying, well, this is the right, and I noticed earlier, I believe it was John who talked about autonomy. If you really want to take that to its logical conclusion, then, and I think one of your guests also mentioned the fact that autonomy, that it's the patient's right to decide, and that Jack Kevorkian, of course, had
Right.
said he was helping terminally ill patients. Then we have to look at the autonomy part of it and say, okay, then a patient should have this so-called right anytime that they believe that this is what they would want to do.
Okay.
So essentially what we're saying here, or what I'm hearing there, is that anybody should be able to request this and get it if it is actually their right.
Okay.
Also, part of your conversation dealt with the patient not being able to self-administer, as Thomas Yauch, who was Kevorkian's last known victim. You're talking here not about doctor-prescribed suicide, but doctor-administered euthanasia by lethal injection. So many times people say, oh, this is just a very narrow area and only for certain people. But even in the discussions of it, like we're having today, it's very clear that it goes beyond that.
Okay, Rita. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time. That's all the time that we have for our discussion with you right now. Thank you. I appreciate it. I wanted to give you an opportunity to join in as well.
Yeah, Oregon was the first state to actually start to ration care. And so part of their measure of the physician-assisted suicide was because of healthcare expense. They pay $1,000 for hospice care. Pain management, as you heard, isn't going to be covered, and physician-assisted suicide medication is the cheapest option. The other element to what we're seeing in that kind of situation as far as the healthcare dollar is the slippery slope idea. That, you know, in the Netherlands, where this has been going on for for a couple decades now, what you see is it starts with terminally ill, then people that have unbearable suffering, then people that have an incurable illness, then people that have a poor quality of life, and then people that, so once you take that line and say there is no absolute to the sanctity of life, now each time that a case comes up, now you start to move that line, and you start to move that line, especially when you have healthcare dollars and other elements coming into it. The line is pretty easily vacillating, and it tends to, like we talked in the very beginning, an abuse of power.
You know, it's interesting. It took that long of the show before the word slippery slope came up, because I thought that would have been perhaps one of the first things that you would have mentioned, that where do we draw the line? Who should be qualified for this? What is considered quality of life, and what is dignity? So I think that's an interesting point to address.
I think that a slippery slope argument, though, is rarely a good argument. There are all sorts of slippery slope arguments that you can give across the board for any number of contentious debates, whether it be abortion or, in this case, physician-assisted suicide. My worry with the slippery slope is just the opposite one, which is that you can take the least plausible case that you can think of where someone ought to be able to exercise a right to physician-assisted suicide and run that in the other direction and say, well, consequently, even the most plausible candidate for physician-assisted suicide should no longer have that right. So there isn't a slippery slope that just goes in one direction, it goes in both. That's what a debate's about. We're trying to figure out where to locate the right point.
I think when you have a situation that's so morally complex as a situation like this, I think it's probably a lot safer to play it on the safe side rather than play it more on the controversial side to allow that slippery slope process to happen. I mean, that's what Germany did. That's what the Netherlands is now. You have people that are 24 years old that don't have a terminal illness, that don't have an incurable illness, that are given physician-assisted suicide. All
right, I'm going to give our viewers an opportunity to weigh in here, because both of you are making very valid points. If you'd like to tell us what you think, you can email me at lynn@lynndoyle.net. I have posted this question on Facebook, and I am getting a tremendous amount of response. If you want to know what people are saying out there in social media, you'll have to stay with us. We'll have some other viewpoints as well when It's Your Call continues its discussion on assisted suicide.